Like all the. Oh, no. It's like, you got water? You here? Welcome back. Thank you for letting me. Gorgeous. It's not in my space.
Okay, focus on everybody. Hi. Those four. There we go. Okay. Gail, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, not so much. False solemn, I don't know.
Yeah.
All right, so I all right, everybody, that's all right. Gail, if you don't mind bringing up the questions.
It is the first part. What was the first case?
Okay, everybody, Baruch. Shake your hand, believe the Sabbath is fire. We're once again, Torah, it's absolutely in lockstep with what's happening in the world, and certainly this morning's Torah, the reading this morning from our sacred story is profoundly resonant and parallel with what's happening in the world. And although we have an agreement not to talk about anything to some extent here in the open book, just wanted to, of course, bring some Torah from this week's parsha. It's hard for me to decide what to speak on. There are so many different pieces in this week's parsha that we could speak on and explore together, as is often the case in the book of Genesis, and certainly in Parshat Vayishlach, one of my favorite parshiyot. Just wanted to begin with the beginning. I'm going to share the screen. You'll see that we divided the kind of the beginning of the parsha up until the moment where Jacob receives his new name. I've divided into little sections, just very much like the Torah describes the offerings that Jacob sent to his brother that are also in small little herds, little sections. I want us to take a look at these psukim, these verses, very carefully, with very little rabbinic gloss, but a little here and there to kind of illuminate the way that the last couple of thousand years have looked at this rapprochement that happens, that doesn't happen between Yaakov and his brother Esav. So to give you a quick catch up to where we are in the parsha, in the Torah rather, in last week's Torah portion, Yaakov ran away from his father-in-law Lavan, and took his wives with him, his family with him, and then Yaakov and Lavan make a brit, make a covenant together at the end of the parsha, and when Lavan or Laban goes on his way, and Yaakov and his family are now free to go back home, which is what Yaakov wanted to do. He wanted to go home. He had made a promise 20 years before that to come back. Actually, a vow. He had taken a vow 20 years before that to come home, that God would to watch over him and bring him back, and that he would come back to Beit El, the house of El, house of God, which is where he had the vision of the ladder going up to heaven and with angels going up and down. And so Yaakov was on his way home, he kind of snuck away from Lavan, and he comes to this moment where he and Lavan have a rapprochement. And then that is the end of, I guess, the beginning of chapter 32, the end of Parshat Toldos. And here we are in Vayishlach. So Vayishlach Yaakov malachim lefanav al Esav achiv arta se'er sedei Edom. And Yaakov sends malachim. These here it's really profoundly intertextually interesting, because when Yaakov, of course, way back when Yaakov leaves his parents' home, running away, it says, "Vayifgaba makom v'yalin sham tiva hashemesh," and he stopped there. The sun had gone down, and he went to sleep. Way back, right when he leaves, vayetze, and he has a vision of angels going up and down, and the word for angels is malachim. B'nei malachim olim v'yordim bo. And here, Yaakov, the beginning of Yaakov's, like, I guess, rapprochement with his brothers, also with malachim, not angels, but here they mean messengers. So something about sending out these messengers to his brother is pregnant in some intertextual way with what was going on back in with the angels going up and down the ladder. That is the future of Yaakov's right capacity to be a conduit for angels to go up and down is connected to his capacity also to reach out to his brother to find out what's happening with his brother. The text very beautifully signals that here. The beginning of Yaakov's transformation is not angels, but messengers. People are sent out to Esav. The text, of course, brings in the fact that he's his brother. The Torah always wants us to know that the fights in the Torah are between brothers. And brothers are really right, the source of all the conflict and the tension in the Torah. So he sends him Arta Seir Sedei Edom. He sends him out to the land of Seir, into the field of Edom. We've said this so many times in the shul, it's like I feel badly every time I repeat it, but nothing good happens in the fields in the Torah. Nothing in the field. The first field in the Torah is the field in which Cain and Abel are in. And even when it says Vayetze Yitzchak l'suach l'sadeh, that he went out to pray in the field, it's also, the field is a place where there's danger, where there's prayer. But here it's pretty clear that Esav in the Torah is not the Torah, whether we like Esav or not, or whether we think that he gets a bad rap or not, it's pretty clear from the Torah that the Torah's not altogether thrilled with Esav. Let's put it that way. But nonetheless, he sends him there. Vaitzav otam lemor, he gave them a command. Ko tomrun adoni le'Esav. Thus shall you say to my master Esav. Of course, the appeasement begins already with these words. My master Esav. Ko amar avdech Yaakov. Thus says your servant Jacob. He's appeasing him with every word. Im Lavan garti, I was living with Lavan. V'aichar ad ata. Garti also means to be a foreigner. I was in exile. I lived there, but I was also in exile. Right? Ger anochimach. Ger means to be a stranger. And I was late until today. Like me, I was late, about 10 minutes late this morning. So V'aichar. It's also a beautiful phrase. V'aichar adata. I was late until this moment. Right? What does it mean? V'aichar adata.
It's overdue.
It's overdue. Right? I've been tarrying, meaning like it's almost an apology, right? I'm so sorry. I got caught up for 20 years. What? I was busy for 20 years. It's like there's also a very strong V'aichar here also as a twin. And as a twin also in the story, the experience of being the experience of V'aichar, to be late, is also an acknowledgement of that he's second. I mean, like, I know that the story seems to indicate that I'm the firstborn now, right? But even to this moment, he's saying, I am V'aichar, I'm like behind you, right? He's trying to place Esav in the front and saying, I know. Even to this moment, I'm late. I'm the second one. I'm behind. But vayili shor v'chamor, tzelon ve'eved v'shivcha, ve'ashtecha lagid ladoni limsochen beinecha. I have an ox, I have donkey, I have a sheep. I also have a retinue, right? I have servants, and I'm sending you this message in order to gain favor in your eyes. Right? Now, what does that mean? I'm trying to appease you. I'm hoping that you'll, what it means. So Rashi, if you look here at the second source, I just brought a very brief 1,000 years later, what is Rashi and the rabbinic tradition trying to understand in the second source here? This is, Rashi brings an earlier source that when Jacob said to Esav, I was living with Lavan, I was Garti, I dwelled with him, but really the word to dwell here is not, is very much, I said, stranger. Lo na'aseti sar v'chashuv elager. Eincha kedai lisnoti al birkas avicha, et Ravinu, sheberchani, heve gvir le'achecha, shari lo niskaima bi. It's a very strong rabbinic kind of undertone, whether it's true or not. It's like, again, like all rabbinic glosses, maybe they're making it up on their own, based upon their own reading here, but they're reading this realpolitik moment as in every word that Jacob is saying to his brother, he is afraid that he's aware that his brother has good reason to hate him. And so he says to him, listen, I know that you hate me because Dad said that I was going to be, I was going to get the lorded over on you, but guess what? Didn't happen. You're the king of Edom. And look at me, I'm a schlepper who made I have a couple of stores. I have I made a living. I have a couple of stores. My name is on a couple of stores. Yeah, but you heard, but I'm not, not such a big deal. I was still a ger there. I was still a refugee. I was still a foreigner. Lavan never accepted me. I was always in a state of exile. I didn't find my home there. And I'm not a gvir. I'm not like a big deal. So I want you to see that. And so I'm sending along what I have. It's not a lot. But nonetheless, Vayashuva Malachim Yaakov Le'emor in verse 7. And the messengers came back to Jacob. They went also haloch v'shov. They went up and down. They went back and forth. And they came back, V'anu el achicha. We came to your brother, El Esav. In other words, they converted here. He was your brother, but now he's still Esav. V'gam holech likratcha. He's also coming towards you. And then this final last 4 words, the arba me'os ish imo. And there are 400, the presumption here is 400 armed men are with him. Now, that kind of reconnaissance, that's not a good thing. In Jacob's eyes, that's war, right?
Yeah.
You can argue whether maybe clearly by the end of the text, we already know, a lot of us know the story, right? I hope all of us know the story that it seems as though he wasn't coming. From the end of the story, it seems like he wasn't coming to war. But Jacob certainly doesn't know that, and he's terrified. So in verse 8, Vayira Yaakov Ma'od. In source 3. Vayetzer lo, and it really troubled him. Vayachatz et ha'am asher ito, and so he split the camp that was with him. Now, Jacob, in the beauty of this text also, Jacob, who himself will be split into 2 names. Jacob, whose life has been split between where he lived, between a life in the house of Rebekah and Isaac and the house of Laban. Jacob, who has 2 wives and who lives everything with a kind of dual consciousness. Jacob is very troubled, and so he does what he does when people are scared, and what we do when we're scared. He splits.
Yeah.
It's funny that term became euphemistic for leaving, right? To split, right? To split off, in language of Freud and others, like in I guess a psychodynamic or psychological, what babies do, they split. So he splits the camps into 2 camps. Vayomer, in verse 9, he said, the verse is talking to us because he's saying, he didn't say it anyway. The text tells us he says it to himself, clearly. This is kind of an inner conversation. Vayomer here means he thought. If Esav will come to one camp and attack it, it means to obliterate it. And at least one camp will survive, right? Like parents who don't go on the plane together, right? At least one parent will be surviving. There'll be at least a surviving community somewhere, right? what's very powerful in this one rabbinic loss that I'm bringing on this very powerful moment, which doesn't need any commentary in terms of its relevance for this moment in Jewish history or throughout Jewish history. Forget about this moment, Jewish history, in all of Jewish history, is this gloss from Rashi, which I remember reading this the first time 30 years ago, and I never forgot it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's come back so frequently now over the last couple of weeks, months. Vayira vayetzer. Rashi, the great commentator, quotes Breshit Rabbah and the Tanchuma, both of the earliest midrashim, are quoted in the 11th century here by Rashi, because even earlier commentators were bothered by this, the doubling of this emotional register in verse 8, and the redundancy. It seems superfluous. Vayira Yaakov ma'od, and he was very afraid. And then it says vayetzer lo, and it bothered him. And the English translation conveys this redundancy by literally splitting the splitting. It says Jacob was greatly frightened, semicolon. In his anxiety, he divided the people with him and the flocks, blah, 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 into two camps, right? So the verse itself becomes split into two. But that is not the way that the rabbis, if you look at the trope, if you look at the musical cantillation, Vayira Yaakov me'od vayetzer lo, it's one fragment, it's one phrase. He was afraid and it bothered him. It seems to be two moments in Jacob's character. And these two moments, though, are related to each other, but they seem to be related in to add one to another. It seems two separate things are happening here, but they're coupled together. So it's weird. So the rabbis decide for that reason to say that there were two distinct emotions happening in Jacob's consciousness. Vayira, which means he was afraid for his own life, right? And that is conveyed with the verb vayira, that he was afraid. Shema yahareg, he was afraid because he didn't want to die. Vayetzer lo has a moral register. It isn't for it's not existential. It's im yaroku es acherim, that he didn't want to kill other people. And my friend Rabbi Adam Klitfeld was, I think, one of the best rabbis in the entire world. I think he's the greatest rabbi in LA, in my personal opinion. Rabbi Adam Klitfeld wrote on this week's Torah portion, he said that every person that we met when we were in Israel together in this past week, every soldier, every person we met was holding both of these fears in their hearts at every moment. And that how unbelievably hard, right, to live knowing that your own life depends upon something, and you're terrified of the potential moral implications of every moment, every single moment, and to live with that, and the terror of that is just this is the way Rashi, living in the 11th century, is imagining Yaakov. Now it could be because Yaakov was afraid because it was his brother, right? It could be that maybe this kind of moral distress might not be alive, in some other context. Maybe it's the fraternal nature of this, but it doesn't feel that way at all. And certainly not that in the rabbinic tradition. It is not. That's not the case. It's kind of a general disdain for this kind of violence that Yaakov was preparing for. Now it doesn't say here that Yaakov was preparing for war. That's an earlier place where the rabbis say that Yaakov, if you look at these. If you look at the text, it seems that he's preparing for three different approaches, one being diplomatic. All of these kind of, in the next moment, you'll see all these different things that he sends. And the second one is prayer, which you'll see also in a moment that he begins to pray. And the third one is the possibility of actually having to go to war. So in source number 6, the next grouping of verses, Izim Matayim, Utyashim Esrim, Rechelim Matayim Ve'elim Esrim. These goes through, like he begins to put together like a diplomatic package. But he wants to send something to his brother. Now, what do you think is going on here? I mean, let's just go through it. Verse 16, okay, all of these different things. And then he says, verse 17, he gave to his servants each flock, right? alone. Levado here, like the word levado, which is going to be important in later on. Each one alone. Vayomer lavadav ivru lefanai, berevach tasimu ben eder uven eder. Go in front of me and place some kind of distance, some kind of buffer between each one of the flocks. What would that create in the experience of Esav or Esav's retinue? Like, what do you think?
Kind of a perception of abundance, maybe there's more to come.
Right.
Just like, it's like the Disney thing.
Wait, but there's more. Wait, but there's more. There's another flock coming. Wow. It keeps coming, it keeps coming, it keeps coming, right? Amazing. And if my brother, he says, it's in verse 18, he says, Vayitzav Rishon Lemor, he says to the first one, if my brother Esav, you encounter my brother Esav, Usha'elcha Lemor, and he asks you, Lemiata v'ana telech, uleme'ela lefanecha. In other words, there's no, you're not carrying, there's no Jacob flag, Jacobian family crest that will be going on these. So they won't know, like, oh, these belong to Jacob. It's just like Esav and his 400 men will see this group this flock of, all of this, and they'll say, who are you and where are you going? And to whom do these belong? They'll say, oh, we are of Jacob, and this is a mincha hishlucha. This is a mincha, an offering, right? A gift. And he is also behind us. That word behind us also comes up again. You'll notice in the text, those who are reading it carefully, you'll begin to notice a repetition of two words that are always in connection with one another. One is face or in front of, and one is achar or acharayim, which is behind. Those are playing textually, linguistically as like motif, like words, the words behind and face behind, late ahead, that whole thing is kind of happening here in the language. And so he says he's behind us, right? It's a mincha. He said the same thing to the second one. In verse 20. Like, these are your marching orders to all of the different groups, to all of these different pockets. This is what you say. You keep saying, oh, this is number 15. We belong to Jacob, and he's right behind us. And 16. So he's like, what is all this, right? It's all, right? It's appeasement.
Yes.
Now look at this verse 21, just in the Hebrew, just listen to it. You'll say to him, behold your servant. This is again your servant appeasement. He is behind us. Jacob is not ahead, Jacob is behind. He assumes the distance and the being behind that he had when he came out of the womb, holding onto your ankle. He is behind, and he recognizes his proper role. He is not to be in front, he is to be behind. You are in front, right? And not only that, they say ki amar, he said, achapira panav, I will appease his face, or I'll propitiate his face. I will ask for forgiveness in his face with this mincha ha'olechet defanai, in this mincha, in this gift that walks in front of me. You see this? And then after that, epanav, and only then will he see your face. Ula yisa panai, and then maybe he'll lift my face. Like the text, honestly, you don't have to believe that God wrote this Torah to believe that it's so beautiful. Like the text is signaling in so many different ways this reproach from all, literally, that he recognizes that he owes him a debt of gratitude, or he's terrified, whether he thinks it's true or not. He's saying all the right things to make sure that Esav, he hopes, won't hate him. And now the mincha, the gift, goes before his face. And he slept in the camp. Mincha and machaneh also here are connected. Mincha, machaneh. This is like Jacob is now back in sleeping under cover of night, like he did when he left, and we've come full circle. He's waiting, terrified that Esau is going to kill him just like he did back when he left. But this time he knows he has no choice. If he wants to go home, he has to face what he has left behind. literally and figuratively. And so this sets up this moment. After sleeping in the camp, he can't sleep. We're in source 7. Vayakam balaylahu. He wakes in the same night. I know people ever read this way. He wakes up, he can't sleep. He wakes up at night. Vaikach et shtei nashav. By the way, he didn't wake up at night when he was sleeping. And remember what happened when he woke up the first time after he had the dream with the ladder? He woke up. He said, "Oh, God's in this place," and I didn't know, right? Here he wakes up and he doesn't have a revelation of God, but a revelation of what? That that night is the best time for him to take his wives to the other side of the Yabok River. Now, by the way, there's some commentators who say that he didn't really wake up. When he went to sleep, this is all in a dream, just like this is happening in a dream state, just like the ladder happened in a dream state. And the wrestling will happen also in a dream state, exactly. But in any event, he wakes up and he takes his 2 wives and takes his family, his 11 children. The text here is so beautiful because by naming now his children, it didn't say this before, it really gives you a sense of the terror for his family, right? He's so afraid for his family. Vayavor et ma'avar yabok. And he passes over the fjord or the ford or like the Yabok River here. And again, all the language here of transformation is being employed. He's going over. The word going over means to traverse, right? To go over. And the river, of course, is homophonically connected to his own name, Yaakov, Yabok. He takes them over the river or this stream. And he sends across all that belongs to him. And this also feels like a death moment, right? He's letting go of everything that he has come to possess or that is now identified with him. And it leaves us as readers ready for this very next moment because now Yaakov is alone. Yaakov levado. Where's source 8? Did I miss source 8? Where's source 8? It was on the bottom there?
Here.
Oh, here's.
It's on the fire. Yes, it's on there.
What there?
It's here. Yeah, it's 5/9. You're right.
Oh, it's on the last page?
No,
No, it should be before that. It's its own page by itself.
Oh. I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, no. 6, 7.
I have them.
Yeah. No, because it's 2 pages.
Oh, maybe.
All right, now Vayivater Yaakov levado. Here it is.
Yeah.
Let's just read this together, okay? And Jacob was alone. Okay. How did Jacob get to be alone, right? He took his family to the other side of the Yabok River. So he went back. He went back. Like he didn't just send them, right? See, either he sent them or he went and then he came back, right? It's not clear why he went back. If in that reading that he went back, it's not very clear why he went back. Yaakov, Rashi will say later on that he went back because he forgot little jars. It's a very strange thing. The rabbis learned from that a person should be, shouldn't be so, it needs to be frugal about the things that they own. But it's deeper than that. Anyway, but he went back. The word vayivater only appears once in the entire Torah, and it's here. To remain like yoter, maybe like he just the remainder yoter that he remained. there is Shmuel Klistner. I think I said this a couple of years ago. The Shmuel Klistner was a scholar in Israel. He was married to an amazing biblical scholar, Judy Klistner. He also is not so bad. He wrote a book called Wrestling with Jacob, and which he looks at kind of the phenomena of wordplay. And here he connects it, I think, brilliantly to a word that is exactly, it's a homophone, but it has one letter changes, which is the vet here. The vav here becomes a vet, and in that instance, it means that this appeared twice. Once here, and the other one with a vet, vayivater with Abraham at the Brit Bein Habtarim. And Abraham in chapter 15 does a covenant of the pieces where Abraham splits these animals in half. And so the word batar here would be exactly the same, except with one letter change, but pronounced exactly the same way. And in that sense, then this would mean, and Jacob was split alone. That in Jacob's aloneness, he encountered the split in him between one part of himself and another part of himself. And that would then mean that the next part of the sentence, verse 25, Vayavek ish imo, and a man wrestled with him, would be himself. And it would be an announcement of, and a wrestling match between a man and himself took place. Until the rising of the shachar, until the rising of the dawn.
That is what a twin would do.
That's exactly what a twin would do, exactly. And that in that way, the Torah's story, the archetypal story of Jacob and Esau is, of course, very much like in all of the mythic structures of twins, Castor, all of them, where what is externalized must be internalized at some point. And here, the wrestling here, what is the wrestling? It's Vayavek ish imo. Now, if you don't read it that way, if you read it as an actual wrestling match between Jacob and a mystery man, which is also a reading, it's interesting. Of course, it's so profoundly literarily powerful that we don't know who he's wrestling with. Like, who's he wrestling with? And why would the Torah leave out such an important piece of information? I mean, like, it's not like people compare this to there's another anonymous Ish. Everybody know where the other anonymous Ish is that plays an important role in the Genesis narratives coming a little bit later on, like next week? Changes Jewish history.
When Yosef meets somebody.
When Joseph is sent by his father, by Jacob, down to see the brothers in Shechem, he's like lost, and he encounters somebody. The Torah doesn't name who it is, and the person says, "Oh, they're not here anymore. They went to Dotan. You can go find them in Dotan." So Jacob's life, Joseph's life was completely changed by an anonymous, unnamed, random person. But here it's like an important. I'm kind of like, why doesn't the Torah tell us who this is? Was anybody thinking at this moment there was going to be a wrestling match between Jacob, and Jacob was left alone, and then you think, oh, he's going to wrestle with somebody. You think yourself, he's left alone, like, okay, what's the next moment? Like here's a good moment that, he prayed, maybe he'll pray again, maybe he'll go back, maybe he'll encounter Jacob in some way, Esau. So rabbis, first of all, say that the word vayavek here, what does vayavek mean? To wrestle. Where does it come from? So you look in Rashi. Rashi says that it's from the word avak, which means what? Dust. So Rashi says that if you look here in source 10, vayit aper ish, a man covered himself with dust. Lashon avak. Shayu ma'alim afar b'ragleim al-yedei nu'am. So Rashi says that the simple meaning of the word used for wrestling here, avak, is from like the word dust. So like they dusted themselves up. That was, they kicked up the dust.
That's what sumos do.
That's what?
Sumos do.
What sumos do. Kind of like
They throw dust up.
they throw dust.
Or say dust up.
They dust up.
Dust
No,
up.
like
Yeah.
that's the language for a fight.
Right, a fight. So
Yeah,
dust up.
dust
Right,
up.
exactly. So that's like here they do it intentionally, here it's kind of just a descriptive, right? So Rashi also brings a second interpretation, which is different, which is even more evocative. Avak. Okay. You did that on purpose. Okay. He says, I think it's an Aramaic word. And he like quotes the early Aramaic interpreter who said, Batar de Avikube, Va'avek le Meva, Lashon Aniva. He says the word avak here doesn't mean dust, which I think would be the much simpler meaning. He says in Aramaic, the word avak doesn't mean dust, it means to connect or to bind together, to join. So he says,
but it's using batar again.
well, batar here is after.
Ah.
In Aramaic, it means batar de avikube, after, acharei, he's just quoting in Aramaic, yeah. So he fastened himself. So look at the end of Rashi. Even in Aramaic, even in Hebrew, like an avuka is a like a torch. So he says that they were hugging and connecting with each other. It's even like it's not a wrestling match. They were binding themselves to one another. And then he adds this gloss in the end from Breshit Rabbah, from Genesis Rabbah, Shehu Saroshel Esav, that this is the archangel of Esav, the guardian angel of Esav. So Rashi basically says that Jacob was hugging and connecting to the archangel of his brother Esau. We'll hold that for a second. In verse 26, and he saw that he couldn't overcome him. He saw that he could not overcome him, and he grabbed or he touched in the hollow socket of the leg, of the thigh hollow place, and Vateka Kaf Yerech Yaakov, and the hip socket or the hip hollow of Jacob was teka. It's like wrenched or dislocated in his wrestling, in his hugging with him. And then verse 27, Vayomer Shalcheni, and he said, we don't know who said, because now pronouns are being used. And he said, send me, for the dawn is rising. And Vayomer, another one said, Lo eshalechach, I will not send you, Ki berachtani, until you bless me. Vayomer Elav, and he said to him, Mashmecha, what's your name? So now we know. Vayomer Yaakov, now we know that the one asking was the angel or the man. He says, my name is Jacob. Vayomer Lo Yaakov Yamer Od Shimcha. Jacob, no longer will be spoken as your name. Ki im Yisrael, for rather Israel, Ki sarita melokim b'man hashim batuchal, because you sarita, you strove, you became a sar, you became an officer with gods and with men, and you were able, you overcame something. It said that he didn't overcome. Now it says he overcame. Okay. Vaishal Yaakov, and Jacob asked. And Jacob doesn't even say, "Oh, great! Now I have a new name." And why not? And now Jacob asked. It's not. But his name was just Israel. Okay, fine. Vaishal Yaakov, verse 30. Vayomer, and Jacob asked, Hagida Nashmecha. Okay, your turn. I showed you mine. You showed me yours. Right? Mine. What's mine? What's your name? Vayomer. He said, Lama zatish'al lishmi. Why would you ask me for my name? Vayivarecha tosham, and he then blessed him there. What's the blessing? Why did he give a blessing? Who blessed who? Vayikra Yaakov Shema Makom Peniel. And then Jacob called the name. Now Jacob goes from being named to naming. He calls the place face of God. Ki ra'iti Elokim. I saw God. Panim el panim. Latinatzel nafshi. I saw God face to face, and my soul was saved. And that saved my soul. Vayizrach lo Hashemesh, and now the sun, which had gone down on him in the beginning of the story, when he was leaving his house, this right? Vayalen sham kiva Hashemesh. He had to sleep because the sun came down. Now the sun doesn't go down on him. Now everything happened in the night, one long night for Jacob. Vayizrach lo Hashemesh. Now the sun will come up with him in verse 32. Kasher avar pnuel, as he had passed over. Remember that word passing over? The Yabok Passover. He has now passed over to Penuel, to the face of God. And with that light and the dawn, he is now limping. The word Solea al Yirecho, the only other time in the Torah the word Solea comes up is in the story of Adam and Eve, where Eve is quote unquote created from one of the tzlaot, from the tzela. It also appears in the Mishkan story, but here he's Solea al Yirecho. He's now limping on that very hip socket. And therefore, verse 33 is a gloss that it's one of the weirdest glosses in the entire Torah. After a narrative story, now we're here that the narrator comes along and says, therefore, lo yochlu b'nei Yisrael gidan nasheh, and therefore the children of Israel will not eat the vein of nasheh, the gid, the vein of nasheh, which is on the hip socket. It's really in the hip socket, on the hip socket, until this day. Why? Because the hollow socket of Jacob has been touched in the Gida Nashe. Of course, Shmuel Klissner points out the word Nashe here appears in Joseph's story. His child's named Menashe, and the name given there is the reason for that is because Ki Nashani, God has helped me forget. This vein of forgetting, right? Gida Nashe, Jacob is touched in the thigh socket where there is, right, a vein of forgetting, and therefore we never forget the vein of forgetting. By not eating, we remember to not forget, because he was touched in this hollow socket. Now, this brings us to all kinds of ideas, and I want to explore, but I just wanted to just stop there. And most importantly, now to open up this last and maybe the most vitally important part of the story this morning for all of us. So what is happening here in this wrestling match between Jacob and himself, Jacob and the archangel, Jacob and this dust up or this intimacy moment? Is Jacob fighting? Is Jacob stop running? Does Jacob finally meet himself? Is it Jacob and his father Isaac in his dream, who will not, who hasn't given him a blessing appropriately with the right name? What's Jacob doing here in the end of chapter 32? And why is this the moment where the children of Israel are born, as it were? So I'll open it up. Jen?
So I work in the field of conflict management, as some of you know, and the thing that really strikes me about him is that what I have written about for the last few years is that so often we think we're fighting with somebody else. We think we're in conflict with somebody else, but actually we're in conflict with ourselves. And until and unless we can figure out what we really want and what we really think and what's really going on for us, we'll keep projecting our own stuff, our own conflict internally onto other people. And so I wonder if it really does strike me that Yaakov fighting with himself, he needs to do that. And then that's why the ultimate coming together with Esav ends up being nothing, no conflict at all, because he wrestled with himself, got to the bottom of it for himself, which was the whole point in the first place.
What do you think was the bottom line?
What do I think was the bottom of it? It's a really great question. Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think
I feel it. He got to his part in it. That's what I'm thinking. Usually that's what it is, because the conflict is always two people.
So Yaakov comes to a place, and I'm not sure, can the Zoom hear this conversation that's going on? No.
Oh,
That's why, and like, I wanted to, so did you hear Jen? Did you hear what Jen said about her own conflict work and the work she's been doing? And then she was asked by Tomas, Jen said she had to get to the bottom of it, that they had to get to the bottom of it. And then Tomas asked, well, what do you think the bottom of it is? And Jen said, that's a great question. And then Lori Walko said, maybe it was Yaakov coming to the place where he recognized his own part in it, right? That he was able to own, what pieces of this were his own, as it were. In other words, like there's a primal scene here. Can I interpret what you're saying, Lori? Like, or do you want to say what you meant?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, when we're only focused on the other, there's a lot of energy there and a lot of anger there. And when we can get to a place of, the fact that every argument is two people and that we play a part in it, whatever that part is, I think it brings, like, so it begins, if you can get to the point of then having compassion for yourself, for your mistakes, then you can have more compassion for the other person, and the whole thing is diffused. It might, of course, not happen that quickly.
Okay. So, no, I want to, Jen, did you want to? Yeah. Okay. I also want to get to, okay, go ahead. Just answer Tomas, because, yeah.
So I have to think about it more, but one possibility is that it actually doesn't even matter what the internal conflict is. What matters is that you recognize that the conflict is within yourself. It isn't with Esau, actually. And so you need to wrestle with yourself. And maybe the reason why the story doesn't tell us what Yaakov was wrestling with him inside himself is because it doesn't matter what he was wrestling with. What matters is that he wrestled with himself.
Okay.
And there's nothing to resolve with anyone else.
Okay. So I'm going to take one more in the room and then go to the Zoom. Amy.
Okay.
I said Amy and then Nikki. Go ahead, Amy.
Thank you. I mean, I'm a very beginner, and there's something magical about hearing things for the first time. So I'll just put that out there. And for me, this really resonates with a kind of hero's journey of what happens when you're deeply alone with yourself and unifying with your higher self, and all the purification and stories that need to get worked through in your divine self.
Right.
And they are like, don't matter, because it's like you just taking out the garbage a little bit, letting it drain out, and then finally you're rid of it, and now can represent an entire people in history because you've had that alone moment that's been so difficult.
So it becomes almost like the dark night of the soul for Jacob. He's alone and wrestling with himself, and he has all these different elements within him that need to be clarified. And they lose their charge, they become unified, whatever, kind of an inner journey, the hero's journey is happening here. So kind of in this interpretation where I focused on the word Vayivaker, Shmuel Klissner, he was split, it becomes the general direction here is that Jacob was wrestling with shadow, what we would call shadow, and that whatever was discarded, dissociated, or given over to the other is now unified within him, and that either conflict then is resolved because the conflict was always a projection of an inner conflict, externalized, and once it's internalized and there's peace made, as it were, between those parts, or there's familiarity, there's conversation, communication, whatever it might be, kind of all that's happening at the inner levels, Jacob, and that's really where the main drama is happening. So that's like one school of thought. I want to, Nikki, just if you want to add to that, and then I want to go into the Zoom.
I
Yeah.
have a wild association about the hero's journey. I'm reminded of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. It's a contest between Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which he's met. It's a challenge, and he proves himself, but he fails in one respect, in that he has a little bit of reservation, and therefore he gets a nerd in the neck, or he gets a bruise and a cut in the neck. And here Jacob is touched in the thigh.
Yeah.
So it's a meeting with the challenger, which is
always leads- it leads-
actually, it's a friendly it's the challenger is laughing because it's a friendly match. But Gawain is furious.
So we have again the archetypal story of like again, this becomes mythologized into Jacob's own inner drama being externalized for us in the Torah, and that he has to go through this first and transform as a figure, as a heroic figure, in order for him to actually meet outside his brother Esau. And for us, for many of us, as I've been teaching this for years, this becomes very instructive because Esau in the end is not coming, at least it seems from the text, not coming to kill him. A lot of that was playing out on Jacob's own inner level, it seems. And so here Jacob has to come to terms with his own. So I'm just going to reserve just to everybody. I have my own take on this that I want to share with everybody in a couple of minutes, but I want to hear more and more of what's been going on in the room and in the Zoom. So go ahead, Daniel, and then Jamie.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.
I have spent a lot of time as a trauma therapist imagining that Jacob is my client. And he's had many, many sessions with me. And what he tells me is his main issue, where he's stuck in a very painful trauma, is that he lied to his father. His father said to him, who are you? And he lied to his father. He said, I'm Esau. And there was a lot of shame that Jacob has carried from that moment of lying to his father, deceiving his father, and also hurting Esau's feelings a great deal by stealing that blessing. And the key moment in this encounter with the Ish, who for me is that divine self within Jacob, the key moment, the redo of that trauma, is when the Ish asks him, Jacob says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And then the Ish asks him the same question that Isaac asked him, what is your name? But this time he replies, Jacob, Yaakov. He tells the truth. And in that moment of truth telling, his sense of trauma gets released. It's like, oh, now I can be me, who I am. And what he discovers is not that he's just a wrestler, but he understands that he's Yasher. He's Yasher. Yes. He is whole and more complete. And that's how he solves the trauma.
Yeah, it's beautiful, Daniel. So I just want to like, so for those also who don't have history here, I know that some of you don't, like, so that's a beautiful Torah. And that was a Torah that I actually taught years ago with Rabbi Abby Stein, who came out in this community as having been born a man and a Hasidic lineage, and came out. And I on that Friday night when she came out as who she really was, talked about the pain of Yaakov having to wear Esau's clothing and to have to lie to get the blessing. This is the moment where he gets to actually say the truth about himself, and then forevermore becomes associated with as Ish Emet in the rabbinic tradition. Yaakov becomes associated with Emet. Hitain Emet Yaakov. The Chesed Abraham. Yaakov becomes the paragon of truth, even though, of course, that makes no sense. He seems to be lying from the moment he's born. But of course, this moment when he actually names who he really is, Mashmecha, he says, "My name is Jacob, and I'm not Esau." The kind of those, right? He had said, "I am Esau" back earlier in the Torah to get the blessing. Now he can say who he really is, and that becomes a healing of that moment of self, of lying to self and lying to other, and being who he was. Beautiful. Thank you, Daniel. Yashikov. Jamie.
Hi. Good morning. A few things. One is that I think Laurie can also tell us, like in yoga, the hips are the area of the body that hold the history, that hold our history, right? And so there's something interesting to be said about that for, that the angel was wrestling, and I don't know. So learning from our history, we have all of these stories of brothers who are pitted against each other several times in the Torah.
Very much so.
Pardon?
Yeah, exactly. Very much. That's the Torah. All our brothers who don't stop fighting for a second.
Right. And then how do we change that narrative? How do we learn from that? our history.
And it just to underscore what you're saying, let's take it not only are the hips the repository of the past, but in our tradition, in the Kabbalistic tradition, the meaning of having been struck in the hip here is actually not the past but the future. That in the loins, that which will come from Jacob's loins, of course he already has 11 children, but one more. And the loins are the place where the future is injured in this archetypal moment. In the tradition, Esau dislocates Esau's angel, or Yaakov's wrestling dislocates his hip, as if to say that wrestling is something that will be generationally a real generational conflict that will come forward, in many generations to come. It'll work itself out intergenerationally going forward. So, thank you, Jamie.
Yeah, I mean, you need all of those muscles in the hip area to move forward with your life.
Totally.
Totally.
To move, right? Of course, but Yaakov moves forward now haltingly. So the Jacob that ran and was always splitting and leaving and running now has to walk in a different way. His mode of walking will be different going forward. Like I said last night in my sermon, many of you were here, many were not. That when I was in Israel this past week, I met with a peace activist from a kibbutz called Kibbutz Nirim, who said, when asked about the prospect of peace going forward, he said, for me, he said, nothing has changed in terms of the goal. I still want to get there, but the roadmap is very different now. So I still have the same, destination, but a very, very different roadmap. And in some sense, Jacob is going to go where he's going to go, but he's going to walk very differently now. But of course, ironically, the very next verse, the very next moment after this wrestling match, the Torah tells us he comes whole to a place called Sukkot. He comes to a very place called Sukkot, Shalem. He's whole, which of course makes no sense. He's not whole. He's limping. But there's a wound that actually makes him whole. And that was the hero's journey that we were talking about. There's a wound that makes him whole. We're going to have one more comment in the room, and then I'm going to give you my only one last comment, and I'm going to reserve the last word. No, I know, I saw behind me, but it's the last word. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. Okay, wait a second.
I just want to respond to Daniel and Kai. What was your name?
Jen.
Jen, right, Jennifer. So I just want to say that in both cases, I think their points help to resolve this question that you raised, Rabbi, about who's prevailing. That earlier on it says that the wrestler doesn't realizes that it won't prevail. But then at the end, Jacob is rewarded for prevailing, but you just said, but I think there's some confusion there. And so I feel like this internal wrestling or this internal trauma work, either way, whatever the work is that I think Yaakov is doing internally explains why he has prevailed. Because I don't think that the wrestling has resulted in a victory. I think it helps resolve that tension, because I don't think that he prevails by winning, right? He doesn't defeat the adversary, the other wrestler, or it could be himself. He doesn't defeat himself either. Whoever the adversary, the wrestler is, the issue is that there's some sort of self-recognition, some sort of internal self-work, and that is what results in his prevailing, and arguably results in what your ultimate question about why is Jacob worthy of becoming, the Jewish patriarch, or going forward with this larger blessing, this much enlarged role.
Right.
It could be that he has prevailed in this way through working through his trauma or what have you.
So I'm sorry, I have to go because it's 9:49. We're only 45 minutes late, so I have to go in 3 minutes. But I just want to say, after a week in Israel, I read these texts very differently than I read them last year and years before, and I feel a bit ashamed that I never read it this way. So I for years have been reading it exactly the way that we read it here today, about the psyche and about internal conflict within Yaakov and about being split and the psychodynamics of it and conflict and so on. But I have a very different read this year, and it's like this, which is I think the greatest shadow that we have as Jews at this moment in our history and I guess in the annals of the last couple thousand years is our deep ambivalence about being a powerful people and about being a sovereign people. That we are so used to being like Jacob, runners, appeasers, those who think a million times before we say the right thing, a million times before we center our own trauma, our own vulnerability, our own weakness, our own grief. We think a million times before we defend, we have to explain why, we're just, or what it feels like to be under constant threat of extermination, and defend it against a world that didn't say a word when our Jewish sisters were raped on October 7th. Not one word came out of the feminist organizations, not one word came out of the UN, not one word came from the Queen of Jordan, not one word from allies and friends around the world. When women, forget about, when women were raped within the first 48 hours, not a word, not a peep. People made all kinds of audacious and ridiculous and disgusting statements. And so here we are, runners, appeasers, making sure that our allies know that we're with them. We look at our own Torah text and it tells us very clearly that Esav said that he wants to kill his brother. The last time Jacob saw him, he said, I'm going to kill you. And we think to ourselves, well, Jacob should own what he did wrong to deserve to be killed. What? What? Jacob deserved to be killed, and he was worried about his family, his 11 children, and that his brother would come and murder his children. And we have all kinds of ways of looking at the text that, like, oh, if only Jacob would own his piece in it, then everything would be okay. Even though Jacob sold the birthright, he sold the birthright, to his brother and so on. But okay, he deserves it. So Jacob needs to turn around and stop running. Jacob needs to know that he's going to get wounded if he fights with Esau, and maybe he'll die. Maybe he'll die. But better to die facing his brother and being strong than to die running away and cowering somewhere. Better to be strong in that way. Not the way of Kishinev, where 49 Jews were murdered, slaughtered, beheaded. And this time, babies are beheaded. And we spend hours wringing our minds. Is it okay for us now to figure out a way to make sure that never happens again to our babies and our children? So here we are. Here we are in the safety of America. The safety and the privilege of being able to walk around and not have to go to shivas every 5 minutes. And the safety and the privilege of living in an America where we sit and we wring our hands about various things while our brothers and sisters are literally on the front lines. Women I just met whose husbands are they wait for 2 weeks at a time to see if their husbands read their WhatsApp texts. I'm not doing that. If I wait 5 minutes before my wife responds to me, I think something's going wrong, in the world. And there are sisters who are living moment by moment wondering, will my children, lose their father this week? And, I just feel like, here we are. Here we are in this morning with Jacob's wrestling. And he's wrestling with a real enemy. He's wrestling with a real enemy, and he's got to learn to wrestle. And it's going to make him messy. He's going to get wounded. It might even, in some way, wound him in a way that he'll never ever walk the same way again. But he has to fight. And so I was there and for 4 days, and I'll never forget I said this last night, that I'll never forget sitting around in a group of women who survived the attack on October 7th in Kibbutz Cholit. And all the women shared stories, but the one that was the most resonant in some way, and I'll never ever forget it the rest of my life. A very soft-spoken woman spoke about how she and her 3 children were sitting in a bomb shelter, and her husband she begged her husband not to go out to get a gun, because if he left her, she thought she was screaming, "Don't leave, don't leave, don't leave." And he said, "I have to go get a gun." He went out to get a gun. He came back. He stood at the door for 8 hours with the gun pointed at the door. 8 hours. He didn't move. And there was a moment where they thought it was over because the terrorists came and they were on the roof and they heard them speaking Arabic. And the mother turned to her son and she said, "Shema Bini." She said, "Bini." She said, "My son, Higeh Zman Lagid Shema." It's the time to say Shema has arrived, which means we're gonna die. And he turned to his mother and said, Ima, Kvar Marti. He said, Ima, I already said Shema.
Whoa.
In the whole country now, the whole country, even during the ceasefire. I came in on Thursday morning from Tel Aviv on a train, and I got out of the train station. And by the way, unless you think like I don't know if people have been to Israel, we should all go to Israel. We should all go to Israel. In Israel, there are hijab-wearing Muslim Palestinian Israelis who are most of them are in the hospitals as nurses and doctors helping soldiers who are wounded. On the same platform in Tel Aviv, I was standing on the platform, and the woman next to me was saying Tehillim, and the woman right next to her was wearing hijab, and she was also saying her morning prayers. And we met with Palestinian Israelis who are 100% supporting what is going on right now. As conflicted as they feel, as it's tragic, and they're crying and they're torn, but they understand that this is not a war with the Palestinian people; it's a war with terrorists who've taken their own people hostage and hold them as hostages in the most cynical and nihilistic and disgusting way. And so it was like the morning of Thursday morning, I got on a train. I came from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and I got out of the train station, and the sirens were screaming. It's a truce. I thought, what's going on? And then I thought, what am I over? It's the city. There might be, an ambulance at 7:30 in the morning. And it was a terror attack. And Hamas terrorists had come in and just opened fire and shot 2 people. And then a 3rd person was killed by guns, by friendly fire. Unbelievable. So I don't know. I think that, at this moment that, the Torah, that's just another interpretation to hold here amongst all the beautiful ones that were offered. My own take. And I guess in this open Beit Midrash, I'm entitled to my own interpretation of the. I think that Yaakov Avinu had to learn to turn around and face Esau, and face the fact that if he kept running, there's no place to run anymore, and that's certainly the case for us again.
Yes.
I was sitting with Micha Goodman, and he was a major intellectual figure in Israel. We sat with him for 3 hours, and I sat with him for another 2 hours, 5 hours together, we've been sitting and talking. And he said this moment is for him the second Milchemet Yom Ha'atzmaut, is the second independence war that we're fighting for Israel in that way. And that there is a possibility now to remake Israel, a broader consensus, a thicker middle. We've seen what the extremists on both sides, extremists who there are peace extremists. Like many of the people who were in the kibbutzim were peace activists in the most amazing and remarkable way, and many of them, their entire worldview has become completely untenable to them. And we spoke to them. They can't imagine going back to the way they thought about the world on October 6th. And that's also what they're grieving. They're grieving that possibility. They're grieving that can't, that can't happen in quite that way anymore. And he was, well, the alternative, of course, is to build in the middle, to build a consensus amongst all of those who are there to try to find ways to, on the ground, change the reality for both Israelis and Palestinians in a way that honors the dignity of the Palestinians and the security, the absolute necessity for security. There's nobody in Israel right now who believes on any level whatsoever that leaving anywhere will ensure the security of the Jewish people. And that is one of the great, great losses and awakenings for them. Now, we can say whatever we want here from the United States, but ask people on the ground there, ask them if they feel like, we spoke to this guy from Kibbutz Nirim, he said, nobody's going to move back to the south of they're not going to, if Hamas is still there, no one will move back. No, and we'll be ceding the entire south of the southern part of the country. Now, there are over 200,000 displaced people from the north and south that Israel has now given land away for peace in the Sinai and gave land away in Gaza